So I'm in Chicago. I've quit my job. I've almost run out of money. You're young, you don't care. And I met Robert, who's now my co-founder. He had mixed a CD of mine a couple of years before through friends and friends of friends. So we meet up, we're having a beer, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm spending all this money on ISDN every month," because he was a sound engineer. And he's like, "But we've got this thing called the internet, right?" And I thought, "I've got a 1 megabit internet in my studio. Why can't I use that? Then it's free." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And because I, had been doing software development and I knew the internet, it just made sense. The two of us really bonded, and I went home to New Zealand and he stayed in Chicago and we built Source Connect.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rebekah. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think there's a lot of interesting things that we'll be talking about. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jodi. Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really great to sit here and talk with you more in depth. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Well, I usually start the discussions about sound where I ask you about a story that you might have of an early memory of how sound moved you. Do you have one of
Oh,
those?
wow. Yeah, that's a great question. Gosh, I've not thought about this before, but going back and just like asking my brain, like, what's the first sound you heard? I'm going to say it's my father playing the guitar. I must have been 4 or 5. And I can see the house that we were living in at the time. So, yeah, around that age. And just those lovely, warm feelings of, intimacy. Thank you for asking that. He died when I was quite young. So it's always nice to when I have a good memory. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I grew up with kind of the same experience. My parents used to have sing-along time rather than story time when I was a kid. So me and my sister and the dogs would all gather on a bed, and my dad would play guitar and my mom would sing, and it was a very cherished family memory for me too. So I get it. Yeah, it's a lovely memory of how music moves you at a very early age. Did that influence where you decided to take your career?
Oh, of course. I mean, it was a couple of years after he died that my mother used to take me to church. It's most, it's back in the 80s. It was what you did. And to be living in a small town on a Sunday, it's how you communicate with the community. And I just remember I went up to her after a service and tugged on her skirt and said, "I need to learn to play the piano." I don't remember why I decided that was important to me, but it was certainly all of that, those built-in feelings of wanting that music back in my life. And my father had left behind a lot of records, vinyl records of classical music, and I would just listen to them over and over again. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a part of you, I think anyone who's a musician knows that it's usually genetic. It comes through the family, and can sometimes pop out from nowhere. But when it's there, when it's in you, it's just something you're compelled to seek out.
Yeah, so you became a composer and you did that
I did.
for how long?
So I started composing around the age of 10 because, again, growing up in a very small town, out of boredom. And then I went to university and studied orchestral composition and ensemble, orchestration. And then fell in love with computers and started doing software programming. And then I worked as an electronic composer, sort of experimental composition, doing live electronics, working, playing the cello and making, sounds at the same time and working with the computer. I did that until Source Elements started. So
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
so
So
that's
when
what I
was
was
that?
doing
That was
in 2003, 2004. Yeah, I
okay.
was in my mid-20s.
So do you think that the music composing helped you with the tech? Or
It's
like,
the
do you think
same
there's
part
a
of the
relation?
brain. I
Yeah.
think,
Okay.
it's maths, music, science. Many of the people in my maths class, at high school were also really good musicians. It's just that there's a similar, the brain neurons there are just very similar,
It's
I
interesting because
believe.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
So thank you for
yeah, yeah.
enlightening me on
Also,
that.
cooking.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
a saying among composers, when we're hanging out with a bunch of composers, we'd be like, if you can't cook, you're not a real composer. Seriously.
Really? I did not realize
We're
that.
obsessed with good food. It's
Oh my
also something
goodness.
that
I
goes with
mean,
that part of the brain.
I like good food, but I cannot cook at all. I'm a singer though. I stopped writing songs probably after I started facilitating it for other people in the early days of the internet. So yeah,
I
but
can't sing, so I'm very envious. I would love, oh my God, if I could express myself with my voice, it would be amazing, but it just comes out raspy. You don't want to hear it.
well, we all have our talents, I guess, that we lean
Yeah.
into, and composition is not something that I would ever be able to do. So, wow. But yeah, it's interesting because I know that for me, I also love the logic of computers. So I used to write songs. I mean, I started doing that when I was 11, but it's kind of similar, that I was bored
Yeah.
and just decided to start doing that. But I never learned the piano like you did. I played by ear for a little bit, but I don't know if you know a lot about playing by ear. I'm sure you probably dabbled yourself, but there comes a certain point where you just can't increase your knowledge. You're kind of stuck at a certain level, and it's really hard unless you have the theory and you're able to expand your knowledge to be able to do things differently after a certain amount of time. So
Yeah.
again, I think I got lazy. So that's kind of what happens. Like when you are able to do something without too much effort, and then it
We get lazy.
stops. Yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
then you
yeah.
stop working at it, and
Yeah.
and that's the death knell of creativity right there.
Really is. Yeah.
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 So, learning a lot about composition and understanding that the logical part of that leans into the tech, then so you got into the tech part of Source Connect and Source Elements. And what was the transition there? What happened to bring you into that?
I've been working as a composer in Europe. So I'm originally from New Zealand. It's important to understand. It's central to much of all this. And New Zealand is very far away. Anyone who's been there will attest how long you have sat on a plane. When I get on a plane and go home, I sit in my seat and I say, I live here now because it's the only way I can cope. I say, this is my home. And just sort of tell my brain 24 hours of this seat. This is my seat. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's very far away. And when you're in New Zealand, especially growing up before the internet on an island, the media was very regulated. We didn't get news. Obviously we had radio news and television news that would come in, but TV, movies, magazines, everything's late. And you just, and so I didn't know that, but when the internet sort of happened in the mid 90s, when I started going online, then I realized, I said, oh wow, I'm like not at all, had no awareness of what's going on really outside the world. I have read lots of books and everything, but mostly fiction. And so I remember one time, like in the 1997, I remember when Princess Diana died because I was online on RIC and I learnt that before everyone else.
Yeah.
I went out and told everybody. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. And it's like, how do you know? The internet, what? That's crazy. And so it was like one of those first moments of finding out that you can connect to the rest of the world with this medium.
Oh yeah,
And I just
mind
became
exploding.
absolutely
Yeah.
fascinated with it. I pretty much dropped out of university and just spent the next 5 years on the internet.
Oh wow.
Taught myself
Okay.
how it works, and
Yeah.
hung out with lots of really cool, amazing people. And then I ended up in Europe, working as a composer at a music institute, electronic music institute, building instruments and writing software and helping artistic projects happen, and touring. And yeah, I just did that. And when you're young, you think, wow, this is amazing, but I don't want this anymore. Looking back, I should have just stayed, but I left. And on the way home to New Zealand, you have to stop somewhere. There's no plane that goes all the direct. So I went through Chicago because Chicago's a really good music town. I had some friends there, and so I'm in Chicago. I've quit my job. I've almost run out of money. You're young, you don't care. And I met Robert, who's now my co-founder. He had mixed a CD of mine a couple of years before through friends of friends of friends. So we meet up, we're having a beer, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm spending all this money on ISDN every month," because he was a sound engineer. And he's like, "But we've got this thing called the internet, right?" And I thought, "I've got a 1 megabit internet in my studio. Why can I use that? Then it's free." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And because I, had been doing software development and I knew the internet, it just made sense. The two of us really bonded, and I went home to New Zealand and he stayed in Chicago, and we built Source Connect. So
Wow.
it
Yeah. There's
needed
mhm.
that distance for it to work, because if we'd have made it in the same office, probably would have had bugs that we never would have found, because it had to be built online.
That's
And
true. Yeah, I guess to even link the two of you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, it's great that that you had the opportunity to meet and find someone like-minded who was as interested in all of this as you were.
Hmm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm curious about something also because I know I used to sell computers in the early days
Oh,
of
cool.
computers, like hardware, like the early days. And
Like
I was on
Dell
the
or?
internet, yeah, like before that was a cool thing to do. And I will say that it was not the most hospitable place for a woman to be.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Ugh.
this, yeah. So I wanted to ask you what it was like being a woman in tech when you were getting started. Like how did you navigate that?
Oh man, here's my favorite story about this. So I was living in Australia. Well, most New Zealanders move to Australia at some point because that's what you do. It's a big city.
Okay.
And I was working in a corporate outfit. I don't know what they were doing, just corporate software. And I went in for the job interview, and they show me where the programmers work. And it's this dark room in the middle of the building with no windows. And this is 1998, and they have pictures of naked women on the walls. And I just walk in, and I'm like, okay. Now, my decision was, okay, I'm not going to work in this room, but I want the job. So I'll just make my terms, and I'll say, I'm going to go work where the designers are, because, normal people. And so who sat next to windows with natural light. So I just took my computer, and actually I built my own computer, which they thought was weird because I was all on Linux back then. And yeah, so I sat there, and that was how I sort of dealt with it. It's by just making it on your own terms. However, I will say the majority of people that I worked with, the majority of men, were nothing but welcoming and completely interested, and as equally curious as I was. It was you got to have some kind of like gumption and courage to to do anything that's interesting, I think. And so that curiosity that I had, that maybe helped me get into a lot of areas where maybe others might have found difficult. But
Yeah. Yeah, curiosity will take you a long way. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
glad to hear that people made you feel welcome when you cared
yeah.
about them
Yeah,
making you feel
exactly.
welcome.
When you care about the same thing, that
Yeah.
comes through, that becomes obvious. And it's
Yeah.
not like the 50s where they're like, "You're a woman, you can't do math." We learned that that was not true. Very good. Women's brains are actually very good at mathematics,
Oh
but
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's definitely the case. And I think from Well, the only reason that I asked that is because from my experience selling computers, I was often, mistaken for the secretary.
Oh, yes. That happened to me up until I got a bit older. And then
Yeah.
also, I think maybe the culture changed a bit. One of
Yes.
the first like trade shows I went to
Hmm.
was like 2006. And I go into one of these big trade shows, and I'm just there by myself because, you know, we're remote, we don't have an office. It's not like we go and hang out together. And I just walked to this trade show by myself and I'm walking around and it's just groups of men in suits standing there talking to each other and no one talked to me. I was very confused and a little upset because I'm like, you don't know who I am if I've got business. Sure, I'm a young woman in a skirt, but you don't know what technology integrations that could happen from the result of our our conversations. Nothing. I did not have a single conversation. It hurt so much. I didn't know how to start one. I was too young also. Um, and But that changed over time. However, I do also remember this is like 10 years ago, so not that long ago. I'm at another trade show and we've got a booth and I'm there as the CEO and uh, talking to some person about something. He came back the next day and he comes up to me and says, I'm really sorry, but I thought you were just a sales girl and I wanted to apologize. I'm not kidding.
Oh,
I
oh,
wish I was kidding there. And
jeez.
at first I'm like, firstly, why did you tell me? Like, keep that to yourself.
Yeah, you don't need to let me know.
No, I'm not understanding what was going on there. And secondly, like, I'm looking around me going, you're right, because this was still the era of like booth babes. And so I made a mission every trade show I went to. They don't do it now. I went up to every vendor who had booth babes and said, do not do this. I will not do business with you and it is offensive and please stop. And it did stop. Not I'm obviously not just because of me, but I think
Yeah.
enough of us spoke up and trade shows are much, much, much more inclusive now. A couple of years ago, I was at NAB and we were, with a group of young women and said, look, why don't you walk around with us and we'll introduce you to the people we know because, now I've been in business long enough. I've got lots of contacts. So I'm like, at least I can get back. So these, women in their 20s, then they don't feel so isolated. And so obviously this mentorship of older women is what's become such a huge movement, where they're so supportive. You've got Gals and Gear, and you've got Rise, and you've got women in streaming media. I mean, it's just incredible now the amount of support that we're getting from each other, and that's just special.
It really is. I love it. Yeah. And I remember those Booth Babe era as well because
Mm-hmm.
I went to E3 in 1999 as a
Ooh,
marketing person.
boy.
And oh my God.
Oh no.
Oh, it was quite something. And yes, there were Booth Babes all over the place. And
Mm,
yeah, it's definitely off-putting for other women.
yeah. It is, because it just makes you feel like, oh, do I not belong here in my role that I am in?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
It's like either you're a sex object or you are, there in glasses and completely logical and that's all you're there
Hmm.
for. Like,
Yeah.
what? And then they ignore you anyway.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it was weird. It was weird. And I agree that over time that has definitely changed and it's really wonderful to see where it's going now. I'm encouraged by hearing your
Yeah.
description there. That's really good to know. So I want to get into a little bit more about Source Connect because when you developed it, you were looking into latency, right? Like
Hmm.
that was a big issue. And of course, when you're trying to, for instance, connect with someone from New Zealand to Chicago, there's going to be a little bit of a lag. So
Hmm.
how do you deal with that? Why do you feel that's such an important topic?
Um, well, it's actually I want to say just a lucky thing that the time it takes to send data around the world using fiber optics or traveling on light is just fast enough that we can have a conversation. It's just pure luck. Maybe the world could have been bigger or the speed of light was slower or our brains would be a bit different. But so if you go back to firstly think about the evolution of the human brain and speech, we evolved to speak in small groups with each other, right? Like that's what's normal. So our brain's latency when we're standing there talking to each other is it's about 10 milliseconds, because the time it takes to cross a room or go through physical airspace. And however, you can still have a conversation with someone who's on the other side of a room, not a large room. And if you then have enough patience, you could have a conversation yelling to somebody across a football field. Because that's latency, because again, it's going to have to travel through a lot more air. But that's actually a lot larger than it is. Like right now, I'm in Europe and you're in the United States. The time it takes to cross over the ocean in fiber optic is about 30, 40 milliseconds, which is, a bit longer than if we were in the same room together. However, their brains are very, very good at compensating. And so we've kind of it's not like we've evolved to have video calls at high latency, but that range of latency in which we're able to compress audio, put it in a packet, send it to the internet, decompress it, send it out to the headphones, is just short enough that we can talk. It's kind of the perfect, Goldilocks spot. We got very lucky with physics in the universe for this.
Yeah.
So latency is not really an issue when we're talking about having a conversation.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.